I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy Wednesday to join us for another session of Explore This. Today, my guest is Bob Cunningham. He's an employee assistance counselor from Life and Work Connections. One of my teammates. Bob, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Chad. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome. So for those of you who are new to this, Explore This is a weekly series where I will sit down with University of Arizona subject matter experts and discuss ideas and tips that relate to the many dimensions of your wellness. So today, again, we're going to be talking about being mindful through life disruptions. And the best person I could think of this is our own Bob Cunningham. He's been having some great content on his Mindful Mondays. We're sharing a link in the chat to join our email list to stay up to date, to participate in those, because they've been great. And in a good way, I've almost fallen asleep in all of them. So I highly recommend that. So let's dive into this. So Bob, I refer to you as the mindfulness guru of our team, mindfulness man, whatever we want to call it. But really, as we think about it, I just have to ask the question initially. What is mindfulness and how can it be helpful during major life disruptions?
Thanks, Chad. That's a good question. First off, I just want to say thank you for having me today. When it comes to mindfulness, when people ask me what mindfulness is, I often say that if you asked 5 to 10 people for their opinion about what mindfulness is, you probably would get 5 to 10 different answers. So if there's a definition that I like to go to for mindfulness, it's the one that's put forth by Jon Kabat-Zinn. And if you're not familiar with Jon Kabat-Zinn, he's the founder of the mindfully based stress reduction program at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center program. And if you're interested in learning more about him, there's a good video. It was done in the 90s that's on YouTube. I think it's a frontline video. It talks more about mindfulness and his program in particular. But he defines mindfulness as paying attention. So there's some intentionality to being aware of the present moment. And we pay attention to the present moment without judgment. Now, to me, when I think of practicing mindfulness, if you think of your life as sort of being like a videotape, when I work with clients, a lot of times my experience of clients is that their tape is not just playing on regular play, but it's sort of in fast forward mode. And mindfulness practice is sort of like helping people to slow down that tape and maybe even sometimes hit the pause button to take time to acknowledge our feelings, connect to our heart, practice an attitude of kindness towards ourselves. Tanya has talked about practicing compassion. Jim has talked about practicing compassion. So it's that whole idea of you bring this attitude of compassion and kindness to the moment, as well as being in the present moment. So it's a way of getting ourselves out of autopilot mode, out of robot mode. Now, in the context of life disruptions, if you think about our regular jobs, when we're on campus, whether we're teaching, working with students, working in food service, whatever it is that we do, we have the regular stress of our jobs, right? But now that we're at home and we have responsibilities with our jobs as it is, you bring into the fold maybe feelings of uncertainty, maybe feelings of fear around what's going to happen with this virus, what might happen with my job. It might bring up a lot of anxiety for us. In regular mindfulness practice, it doesn't eliminate anxiety. Oftentimes people will say, hey, I don't want to, when they come to see me, they'll be like, I don't want to feel anxious anymore. And I'll be like, well, that's going to be kind of tough because anxiety is a natural human emotion. We all experience it. But mindfulness practice is about taking that anxiety, taking that fear or uncertainty, and taking it out of the driver's seat and putting it in the back seat so that you are able to make good decisions for yourself and not make decisions out of anxiety or fear.
Okay, awesome. Great tips. I think about that. So many of us, we do get into that autopilot mode. And now we're not, many of us commuting to and from work, how many times I drive to work and I'm like, I don't even remember how I got here. So
Right.
being more mindful is definitely something that I can work on as well. So really then, how can someone implement mindfulness practices more into their day-to-day routine?
I think the best way to start is to implement a routine. So as opposed to just like, well, maybe tomorrow I'll do something, really make a commitment. I think commitment is the thing that once whether you handwrite it, like I'm going to practice mindfulness this month, whatever works for you. There is some research that shows that if we write things down or make a commitment to somebody verbally, we're more likely to follow through with it. But I think routine is the main thing that you want to start with. So for example, having a morning routine where maybe you sit up in bed or lay in bed for a few minutes and do some focused breathing. Think about how do I want to show up today? What is my intention for the day? What's something that's compassionate that I could say to myself right now? I think we're really good at beating ourselves up. So if we can sort of practice a new way of being kind to ourselves, again, bringing that attitude of kindness to the picture, we start to affect our brain in a different kind of way. During the day, I think practicing mindful eating, I think many of us, when we sit down and eat, we get into the habit of maybe turning, especially now that we're home, we turn on the TV and we start shoveling the food down and we don't even know what we ate. Before we know it, our plate's empty and we're like, what did I have for lunch? So mindful eating is the practice of taking a bite of your sandwich, putting it back down on your plate, noticing the texture of your food, noticing the flavor of your food, noticing the smell. Again, you're slowing down that tape. Incorporating some intentional pauses into your day. It's a little tougher right now. I'm a big proponent of incorporating nature into mindfulness practice, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the interview. But if you can get out into nature, maybe go for a mindful walk. If that's not possible, just taking a moment to maybe find someplace comfortable in your home to sit and rest and do some focused breathing. And then in the evening, I think doing some mindfulness practice in the evening can be a really good way of signaling to your body that it's time to downshift into sleep mode. I have a practice of taking a warm shower or hot bath, and then before anybody else goes to bed, I go into my bedroom, I sit on my bed, I dim the lights, I do some focused breathing or meditation, and it really signals to my body that it's time to shut it down. It's time to get into sleep mode.
Awesome. You know, I really love those tips that you said. You kind of have to really put those pauses in there. You know, and I think about that, something I practiced even this last weekend. I usually do a lot of my walks with headphones in. I'm listening to something. And I thought, you know, I'm going to do it without headphones and try to be a little more intentional. And it was cool to be able to hear the birds, hear my feet on the gravel and something interesting. And that was really interesting to me. So then, where you kind of mentioned some practices, but how long really does someone need to practice mindfulness to reap those benefits?
So, you know, there's a lot of research out on mindfulness right now, a lot of recent research coming out, and really research on mindfulness has been going on for a good 10 to 15 years. A lot of the research doesn't really specify length of time necessarily, although a lot of the studies will say, in this study, we had this group and they did this mindfulness practice every day for 10 minutes. I think the main thing that's important about mindfulness practice is consistency of practice. So in my opinion, if you're new to mindfulness practice and the idea of doing 10 to 20 minutes of focused breathing or meditation seems overwhelming, then you can start simple. And I mentioned this in my Monday mindfulness this week when we talked about meditation, that you can start small. Just start with 3 to 5 minutes of doing some focused breathing or a focused meditation. When I do this, when I work with a client individually, we'll often take this approach and I'll say, look, do this for 1 to 2 weeks, see how it goes for you. And if it's feeling okay, we can build on it. We can add minutes to it. And before you know it, by the end of the month or 2 months, they're up to 10 to 20 minutes a couple of times a day. I think if you talk to people that practice mindfulness on a regular basis, they'll say that they have a regular practice of anywhere from 20, 30, even up to 45 minutes per day. And they might be breaking that into 2 separate chunks. For myself, I usually do a morning, midday, and evening practice anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. And that's seems to be a good amount of time for me to kind of get dialed in for the day and feel like I have my feet on the ground, feel good and centered, and have my anxiety level where it's not driving the bus.
Awesome. And I liked how you mentioned that it really is, it's taking steps, baby steps. We're not going to run a marathon the first time we decide to go out and get some physical activity, that it's steps there. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. So you mentioned that you do, that morning, midday, and evening mindfulness exercise. So what are your go-to mindfulness exercises then?
So connecting with nature is always really important to me. And as you know, our offices at Life and Work Connections on campus are right across the street from several hundred yards of sidewalk that is shaded by olive trees. And that, when I'm on campus, that's sort of my go-to place to where I like to go in the mid-morning, 9:30 to 10 o'clock. I like to go there in between sessions with clients. I also like to go there in the afternoon. The nice thing about it is it's, whether it's summer or spring or fall, it's shaded enough to where it's usually pretty comfortable. And when I work with clients individually, I ask them to find someplace on campus like that can be sort of an escape for them. And I usually recommend that they try to find something in nature because, we're usually cooped up in our offices working all day. I think it's good to get out into nature. So that's one of my practices, is to do that. Now, what I do specifically is I do something called a mindfulness walk, or some people call it ground surfing. And what that involves is when I get to that sidewalk, right when I reach the front of that sidewalk, it's a signal to me to slow my pace. And so I'm going back to that definition of mindfulness, I'm bringing some intentionality to the moment. I am intentionally slowing my pace down. Now, if I'm having trouble doing that, usually that's a sign that my mind isn't present. I'm usually thinking about something that's on my desk, or I'm thinking about a client that I just met with. And it's a sign that, hey, if I'm walking too fast, it's really a nice physical way for me to tell myself, hey, Bob, you need to slow that tape down. You need to slow your roll. And then once I do that, I incorporate another mindfulness practice called the 5 senses exercise. So I will start to pay attention to what do I see in my environment? What do I, maybe focusing on the color of the leaves on the trees, the color of the green grass, the color of the bark on the trees. I'll start to pay attention to things that I hear, the birds, the insects. There's a particular area near our office that floods, and there's always dragonflies. And I'll usually pause and take a look at and watch how they fly. They do this interesting figure 8 thing, and it's kind of mesmerizing. And so nature, the benefit of nature is it has this sort of natural way of drawing us in. You can't really help it. And so that's why I think it's important to get out of our office. Now, when I'm at home, it's a little bit more of a challenge because I do have a park near my home, but it's a little bit hotter. I don't have as much shade right around my house, so I have to change my routine a little bit. I tend to do more of that mindful walking in the early morning or later in the evening when it's a little bit cooler. And then I've also incorporated some meditation practice on my front porch, which has been really a nice change. So those are a couple of things that I like to do, but nature plays a big part in my own practice.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And I do echo those trees in front of our office. Make it bearable when it's 107 to be able to get outside and actually get some movement throughout the day. So Bob, I do this with every one of my guests on this series, and I ask them at the end here, so in the last 30 seconds that we have or so, what is something that you are currently doing to better your health?
Well, you and I have talked about in the last 4 or 5 months something that I got into. I'm getting a little older, so I can't do a lot of the things that I used to do because I have some joint issues. I have gotten into group fitness, and playing team sports most of my life, group fitness has been a nice replacement for some of the team sports that I used to play. Now, obviously, gyms are closed, and it's harder to find the group fitness at least I can't go to the one that I used to go because it was in a gym format. But I've been able to, I learned enough in that experience to take some of those exercise routines. There's just body weight exercises that I can do. And I do those at my local park in the evening or early in the morning, just doing body squats, push-ups, burpees, taking some of that stuff into my local park and doing as much as I can. And of course, like everybody else, I'm doing a whole lot of walking right now. So mindfulness practice is really important, but we also have to incorporate some of that physical exercise as well. And I think those two things together have really helped to balance things out for me.
That's awesome, man. Well, Bob, again, I want to thank you for hopping on and going through this with me and sharing all these great tips for everyone. Again, I want to remind everyone, join our mailing list. The link is within the chat. Hop on our website. Check out all the other content from what Bob has put together, our other colleagues as well. And we have a lot of great content. So please stay in touch. Keep doing what you're doing. And I want to wish you all a happy and well Wednesday, and have a good one. Be well, everybody.
Thanks, Chad.